the number one thing that I wanted was cash flow. So the goal is, how do you create the highest cash flowing asset available to dads or investors? Because wealth creation is certainly one good way. Like, you can do multifamily syndications, which are great. You get the 2x multiple over a period of 5 years. But for me to get that time freedom, it's got to be the cash flow.
You're listening to Ice Cream with Investors, a podcast that is dedicated to teaching you how to better invest your money so that you can live a more intentional life. I'm your host, Matt Four, and it is my goal to teach and empower you to remove the roadblocks to your financial success.
All right, Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I know we were just connecting like right before this, talking about some different things. So I'm really excited to dive in more because I'm just really pumped about this conversation.
You have a message that's very impactful for me right now as we were kind of talking through. So I'm excited as well. But before we get there, we like to start with the difficult questions here. What's your favorite ice cream?
Cookie dough ice cream. Got hooked on it. Maybe it was because I was eating like the forbidden, like you can't eat the eggs unless they're cooked when I was younger. And so it became like forbidden fruit, but that's it forever.
Okay. Have you ever, there's this place here in Nashville that does cookie dough and they call it ice cream, but it's definitely not ice cream. It's like chunks of cookie dough. Have you ever had something like that?
Whether it's the cherry berries or the DQ or the Sonic or different pieces that kind of have like the pre-cooked or like the raw, like I feel like I've tried it all. So I'm not sure if it's specifically like location dependent, but yeah, just like scoops of cookie dough. Like you could just add it into different things and like, yeah, it's a kryptonite.
Yeah, because I think like when I had that, it has to be in ice cream for me. I tried the raw cookie dough. After about 2 bites, you're like, I can't eat 10 ounces of this. So you have to throw it in some ice cream. But yeah, big fan of cookie dough over here. Well, tell our listeners, what's the scoop? What do you do today?
So right now it's two things. It's creating a rent to own fund for investors to buy homes for people that are 1 to 3 years away from getting a mortgage and kind of doing some matchmaking. And then number two, which is the more recent side project, it's helping working dads that have young kids. So I got a 5, 3, and 1-year-old. Manage that while trying to do real estate investing on the side, because that's what I did as an engineer, started a family, got married, and all these different pressures. And we call it, you're in the thick of it. And so it's just helping dads navigate through that since everything's so front loaded in life.
Yeah, so our listeners know that I like to start where your real estate journey began, but we're going to switch this up a little bit and start and backwards and work ourselves forward. And let's talk about the dad piece. So being in the thick of it, as you call it, with a 1, 3, and 5-year-old and real estate investing, like how do you juggle all of that? Let's just start there.
I think it starts off with that decision of, okay, I'm working. And you're like, okay, that can be honoring your family, right? You're bringing in financials, but there's usually that like, there's some sort of tug in your brain. I remember sitting in the office like, oh, when I'm at work, I feel like I might want to be with my kids, or I should be designing something where I have more time freedom because I want to show up as a dad. And not only is it my physical time, because kids spell love TIME, and all they want is your time. You don't really have to show up like great, even though that's awesome. But a lot of times you just sit with them on the floor and they'll jabber and they'll do whatever. And they just want to tickle fight and they want to find this bug and stare at a fly for like 4 hours. And so like I realized, like, especially transition times in the morning or in the evening after they've had daycare or school, like they're just so emotionally spent. And I feel like, okay, it's 5 o'clock. My wife's spent, I'm spent. It's their witching hour. And it's like, oh my gosh, like this just seems like a ball of chaos. And I was like, like, is there a camera in other people's rooms? Like, is it just an absolute pandemonium where like there's dishes done, there's a mess. You got the 1-year-old like hitting the 3-year-old and the 5-year-old's like running out the front door. And I'm like, this is just insane. Like what is happening? And I'm like, I love my kids. And like, but I'm like, I almost felt like a failure as a dad and a husband, because I was like, oh, I'm supposed to provide stability and control and different things. And so a lot of it was like, oh, what would peace look like? Because like let's all just dream like that for a little bit. But then at the opposite end, okay, what does it just not look like to suck? Okay, let's make sure I'm not getting divorced. Let's make sure our kids, aren't getting bad habits. And so a lot of it was, how can I just be a lot more intentional with my kids? And it starts with just getting more time freedom and being and organizing that, which was a big impetus for doing a side hustle, which happened to be, real estate investing, because I really wanted to spend a lot more time with them on, just making sure that investing that time when they're 1 to 5, like how much subliminal programming goes on there that I'm just not even conscious about. That's like, ooh, I do that just like a house. I buy it now, 30 years later, it's worth, no debt and $2 million. You put that same investment in your kid at 5, and when they're 30, like the same kind of ROI, but maybe not in the direct realm, really hit me as I was, sitting in the civil engineering office. I was like, oh, I got to do something else, because my kids might thrive when I do nothing. And it's kind of like the sink or swim. Like you hear the stories of like people just like, yeah, I had a bad parent and like somehow I survived. And it's like, okay, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But there's also, for every one of those, there's 10 stories of like, oh, I had an awesome dad who was there nurturing me, watching the baseball games. And I feel like I'm going to gamble on that one.
Yeah, you said a lot of things I want to touch on there. First of all, is this idea of intentionality. So I'm in the process of editing my book right now, and a core concept in the book is ROI. And ROI doesn't mean return on investment. It means return on intentionality. And I think it's very, very important. And why I got involved in real estate is for the time freedom that you just mentioned, so that I could be more intentional with my habits, with my passions, with my family, with the people that I care about, and things like that. The second thing you mentioned was this idea of a subconscious and developing that subconscious. Some of the studies I've read is that a kid's subconscious develops by the age they're 7. And the internal monologue you give them and talk to them and how you speak to them and what you tell them about themselves is the things that they're going to carry forward. So on that, do you all have any like life mottos or kid mottos that you repeat to your kids over and over to help them build that self-image, self-confidence in themselves?
I stole this from another front row dad member, and he calls it rules for life. So we have our Zoc family rules for life. What's the most important thing in life? And it's to get to heaven. Okay, how do you get to heaven? You love God, you love your neighbor. Okay, what's love? Love is an action. Who is God? God is Father, the Son, Holy Spirit. What's the second most important thing? Free will. And so it's me going question, them answer, a 3-year-old, 5-year-old. It's amazing what they can memorize. And so we have like a full page of like, what are those different life lessons that even if they don't understand it, they're just like, they're answering it. So if somebody asks them, what's the most important thing? Or like, what's the secret to success, long-term gain over short-term pain? Like they're going to emulate that. And then recently I asked my daughter, okay, what are your rules for life? These are our Zoc family rules. So Adam Zoc, like these are the Zoc family rules and different things, but what are yours? And then having her come up with some, and then we print them up, we put them on the wall. And then I asked her different questions. And like, even though I'm like shaping the environment, I can't change the kid. Like I could put a lion in a house, but the lion's still going to tear the hell out of it. But like, I'm trying to shape the environment for our kids to thrive in a way that I think will benefit them. But if they eventually push back or they don't accept our values, like more power to them, because they're each going to have their own individuals. So then we have our own individual values and rules that are combining into the, hey, here's what our parents thought. Here's what our grandparents thought of like faith, family, fitness, being some of their core values that they want to pass on. Now we can either accept those or reject those. But I stole that from some other dads. And like that was a really cool thing of just like someone indoctrinating them, but like they learn about Martin Luther King and all these other stuff that they're memorizing. Why not have kind of the home life value things that I really want them to memorize way more than any letters or shapes or alphabets or different things, because I feel like that's my role as the dad. Like mom's like, okay, yeah, make sure they get a good school. I want them to read and write, but like dad's like, all right, well, when push comes to shove, what are your kind of your life principles that you're going to operate by? And I feel like that's my role to enforce some of those.
What, out of curiosity, what were her rules? Do you remember some of them off the top of your head?
Yeah, we got them all printed off. Her number 1 was be kind. Number 2 was be healthy. Number 3 was love God, love your neighbor. Number 4 is love is an action. Number 5 was be careful. And I almost tried to convince her about that because that's my wife. Like her number 3 value is security. And I caught myself because I was like, be careful. I was like, I don't, we don't value that. But like, again, that's me imposing that. But my daughter, super careful. Like, and that's what she values right now. And then number 6 was escaping me. I'll remember. But like, I specifically remember like catching myself like, oh, I'm going to coax her. Like, nope, these are her values right now. And they might change. But it was really cool to have her with no prompting, like, and it might change tomorrow, right? With a 5-year-old, but like, it was cool. Cause then she went on there, she picked the fonts that she wanted on her Ava's rules for life. Numbers were green and the letters were purple and her name was pink. And it was like, all right. And then you print it off and you show it to her. And then now she can slowly start to read. So every now and then I'll just pick it up and be like, hey, what were your rules? And then she's now internalizing this. And I'm like, oh man, this is so cool. Cause like now it's not just the Zoc family rules for life. These are her rules for life that she picked with some encouragement. And, there might be 13 and she might just rip up the piece of paper and be like, oh, I have all new rules for life. And it's the complete opposite. But I'm hoping that the foundation of that is enforcing that for the future.
Yep. Yep. Now, did you all, obviously the answer to this question is probably just sit down with them and ask them, but did you all have any exercises to help them realize what they were doing or help them guide them to what they should be thinking about for this? What did that look like?
So the biggest one was I have a color coordinated graphic of my values, my wife's values, and then our family values, because each of us has different things. Turns out my number one value is growth and her number three value is security. And it's like, oh, that's how we complement each other, right? She's like, don't do any investments. I'm like, hey, guess what? I bought a houseboat, kind of like the Chip and Joanna gains, those are complementary as opposed to, instead of, opposing. I like to call them complementary because it's like risk adverse, risk seeking. Like we make a good, and then there's the family in the middle. And then what we're doing is we're adding theirs to the side. And so we're saying like, okay, here's ours, here's how it beats the family. And then we're going to add Ava's, then Logan's, then Williams. And so the question around that was getting, if you're familiar with like the family board meeting, it's like giving them some space or some time and doing that. But a lot of it was just like, hey, we're sitting on the floor here. And she's like, hey, should we do some rules for life? And it was just the idea of like, hey, do you want to make up your own? And she's like, oh, I can do that. And so that one was less intentional, more spur of the moment. And I was like, yeah, we can create it on the computer. But the whole reason that happened is because we allowed ourselves to get bored. I feel like that it's almost impossible to do. Like it's always schedule this, then gymnastics, then swimming, then you got to go to daycare, then we got to do this. Like, nope, like get so bored with your kids that you find something to do. Like we were making Captain America shields out of like cardboard because like, and to be honest, I try to be a full-time dad. I can't do it. I got to work because like the mental, intellect, but like, it was so fun to figure that out. As an engineer, it's like, oh, I should be, more present as a dad. And I was like, ooh, what would it look like to be on the other side of a full-time dad? And it was fun to see like, once you open that door, you're like, oh, there's a whole bunch of other doors. And am I really that good at, patience with young kids? And so I was like, oh, what's kind of this healthy balance? And I coined this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 rule where it's 50 hours of sleep, 40 hours of work, 30 hours of family time, 20 hours of miracle morning. And then you have 10 hours. So that's roughly like 150 hours a week. And I was like, if I fit within that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 framework, like my time is generally allowed to something that helps Adam thrive. But I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Yeah, I might steal your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 framework there. I love that. But if a certain interviewer on this podcast or host of this podcast wanted to see kind of what that looked like, do you have those posted, your rules everywhere and how you were mentioned on the side and everything like that?
I am slowly building up the content. It's all in Loom right now, and I'm leaking it out to YouTube. But right now, engineeringrei.com is where I've started framing some of that out on what that's going to look like, either a community or some coaching or different things. And so it's in development, but I realized like for a long time it was, get into real estate and it's like, okay, yeah, we took care of our family. But then it was like, ooh, who's one person that Adam can uniquely help? And it's Adam 3 to 5 years ago. And I was like, I could pull up a journal article where I was just like questioning everything in life. Like my toddler hates me. How come I can't connect with this human being? Like what's wrong with me as a dad? Because like sleep's off, my health's off. Like I'm trying to figure out, is it work? And then I'm blaming my wife because she's not, picking up the slack. We're really just my own insecurities. Oh, and then we're pregnant, with a newborn baby. And it's like, I was like, what is this? I was like, and then at some point it was like, okay, instead of this being the hardest time in life, like, what if this was the greatest time in life? I'm building a business. I have the opportunity to like frame like these wonderful human beings. Like our marriage is going to be the foundation of this is like when times are tough, like how you fight matters, not how much you fight. I remember the Gotham Institute doing like this study. It's like not if you fight, it's how you fight. So then it's like, oh, cool. Like let's learn how to do that. And so getting to that point of like, oh, this morning, my wife and I went on an hour walk and talk outside, like just hashing out stuff, planning different things. That 30 minutes to an hour walk and talk now 3 or 4 times a week is like something so core to like how healthy our family is going to be. That is impossible with us both working our past engineering jobs. And so like as encouragement, and a lot of people enjoy what they do, but like if they're specifically looking for like, hey, if I could work 30 hours a week instead of 50 or 40 instead of 60, like just to like, oh, what would an hour look like with my spouse or significant other? Like that is like just so fundamental. Like you're moving, you're connecting, you're talking about issues in a healthy, not like it's 5 o'clock, you got to feed the kids, everybody's in a poor mood. And then you like snip at each other and be like, well, you didn't pick up the mail, well, you didn't take out the trash. And it's like, all right, this is not a healthy way to go about it.
Yep. Well, you probably don't get too often to go for those hour-long walks living in Fargo, North Dakota. So I'm sure you cherish the time when you're able to do that as well.
It's like a whole new season here. You see the sun and it's not 32 below. And it's like, man, you feel like you're just born again.
Yep. Yep. So you sound like a guy that's very thoughtful in the way you try to approach things, and this idea of investing or reverse engineering your life. You came up with this concept called reverse investing and how you approached your real estate journey. Talk to us a little bit about what reverse investing is, and I got a couple of questions I want to ask from there.
Sure. The simple way is people first, property second. So instead of finding the property and figuring out the tenant that's going to live in it or who the end buyer is, we find whoever the buyer is going to be and then have them go identify the property. And that came about a couple different ways because we kept trying to flip properties, hope there's a renter then, or hope that there's a buyer. And then we were buying like turnkey rental properties, but then you run out of capital because you're putting 20% down. And then it was like, okay, what would this look like? And then, my buddy was like, hey, I can't get financing, but you're an engineer and you can get a pre-approval letter in about 12 seconds. What if you bought me the home and I just paid you and you leveraged your financing and I just paid you extra every month? I was like, oh, this is genius. Like, he's putting up all the money. I'm signing a piece of paper. And then like, I already have him and he's going to buy back the home after a certain amount of time. So it's like, oh, cool. Instead of like going on the MLS, searching for all these properties, our new target is finding those people that are 1 to 3 years away from a mortgage, pre-approving them with kind of some vetted investor criteria. And then we're matchmaking those two individuals. So you get a doctor from California that's like, you know what? I would love to buy a property in Fargo, North Dakota for $200,000 that rents for $2,000 a month. And if I close May 16th, there's going to be tenants in there May 16th.
Yeah.
And if I don't close, because they don't show up, like I'm out no money. The tenant buyer puts in the money, pays for the inspection. It's still the appraisal. And if the tenant buyer, in which case we call the tenant buyer, puts in 20% and the investor gets an 80% loan to value, we've done deals where like there's literally no money exchange, but you're almost like a glorified co-signer, but you have this investor property, you have cash flow, you don't have the vacancies. And then a lot of the repairs are on the tenant buyers. And so that was our strategy. And there's some big companies doing it like Divvy Homes or Home Partners of America, where they call it, lease with the option to buy. And they're doing thousands of these. We just happen to find this market in the Midwest. And those companies are in like the major metros, but they don't offer it up to individual investors. They have these big hedge funds or they get these angel investors. So what our goal is, man, the number one thing that I wanted was cash flow. So the goal is, how do you create the highest cash flowing asset available to dads or investors? Because wealth creation is certainly one good way. Like you can do multifamily syndications, which are great. You get the 2x multiple over a period of 5 years. But for me to get that time freedom, it's got to be the cash flow. And so I wanted someone, as soon as they put in money, they're getting cash flow. And you can do that in certain, vehicles. But I was like, but the tax benefits of real estate, the risk versus the reward, how much security you have. And so that's where we've then moved into that. And that's all we do now.
So let's walk through a couple different pieces of this. First and foremost, how do you find your tenants? Like, how do you find the people portion of this equation?
Turns out there's 140,000 people searching rent to own every single month into Google.
Wow. Did not know that. Okay.
It's I was shocked. And so all we're doing is simply tapping into that and then advocating to real estate agents that like, hey, is your client not pre-approved? We'll buy the home using our LLC. You can still get this client into a home. And so then real estate agents start promoting it, or loan officers that can't close a home. But a majority of it is just, online advertising, being pretty smart with that, and then finding referral partners to get these people. But it was like, I forget the number, but like, there's not too many search words besides trending ones that are much higher than that. And it's because there's like 3 billion people denied a bank loan every single year. And it turns out people really want a house. And there's some people that like me that, well, I quit my job. And so now my adjusted gross income, technically, because I'm not a civil engineer, credit unions, banks won't touch me, even though I'm making more money now. But on paper, I look like dog crap because I don't pay any taxes. But they're like, oh, well, it turns out you need 2 years. And it's like, oh, well, it turns out like I literally need our own program and I need someone who's got a W-2 job. If they're like, oh, I trust Adam, I'd buy a house from him, he's going to make a payment. And so that's why we go through like condition, location, the tenant buyer profile, credit score, like debt to income. Like we still screen all that. And it's just a matter of, okay, if they're riskier, they put more money down, just like a bank would. Like I kind of joke, like anybody that's going to put 20 to 30% down on a home, if you give me your name and a signature, I'll buy the house for you, right? Like
Yep.
there's almost very low risk of like that going bad if they're going to move into the house when you're buying something 70 cents or 80 cents and it's on the MLS. So like you get an inspection report, you know, the foundation, it's not like you're buying them sight unseen. So that was the model that we wanted to then share, since that allowed us to quit our jobs, even because that's what we wanted. First, it was just to supplement some income just so we could go down to 30 hours. Then I went to 20 hours. Then it was like, oh, cool. I really enjoy this. Now it's both quit our jobs, me and the co-founder. And so now it's helping other people do the same.
Yeah, I think when I hear doesn't qualify for a mortgage, a lot of people out there will think, oh, that must be a risky borrower. But let me go ahead and say there's a lot of people that are quote unquote unbankable in our country. They could be people that are working a W-2 job who might not make enough money or might not have the right paperwork, haven't been in it long enough, or more importantly, there's probably a lot of people that are business owners, gig workers who make fantastic income, but because their tax situation, they claim a lot of losses, they claim a lot of depreciation, all that sort of stuff, don't file that they make a ton of money. And so when I'm immediately thinking of rent to own, yes, there's going to be a portion of the people that you find that probably don't qualify and wouldn't qualify through your program either. But there's probably a ton of people that are very, very accredited borrowers, but they fall out of this little checkbox that the banks want to see.
And then two things to that. So we started a podcast called Pre-Approved, dedicated to the rent to own tenants, because I feel like they're getting screwed. Somebody be like, oh yeah, just give me 10 grand down, sign this piece of paper. In a year, I'm going to kick you out. And then I'm going to take another 10 grand and I'm going to go do the same thing over again. And so we're really dedicated, put about like 50 episodes out of like what rent to own is, what's the problem? Why is it scams? Why has it got a bad rap? Here's all the reasons why. And like maybe why you should or shouldn't get a rent to own. Like if you can wait, get a bank loan, fantastic. Like recently became a loan originator myself, just so that I can understand the process. And even not only that, but as people get into rent to own, actually qualify them and then put them into a traditional product so they have a higher level of success. So like right now, 80% of our people have bought back the home, which like compared to the national average of like 10%,
that's
is
high. Yeah.
Shockingly different, but we haven't done a ton of volume. So that number's a little bit, from a marketing number, like is good, to say, but like we're fairly new. And then number two, one thing I didn't notice is like, okay, what do banks do? Oh, they get private mortgage insurance. So what we do is we have the tenant buyer purchase what's called rent guarantee insurance. Had no idea that existed, but this is just us being problem solvers. Turns out there's 3 different companies that you can purchase rent insurance that if they default, they'll pay you for 6 months of lost rent plus eviction and up to $1,000 of repair costs. So now we're like, oh, we can just like literally act like the bank. So if they default, which is the worst case scenario, not only do you have 10% down, but now you got this insurance because they're riskier. And so like, man, this is why I love real estate. I was like, I had no idea that rent guarantee insurance, but I was thinking the same thing. Like these are riskier. Like what do the banks do? And I was like, oh, can I put private mortgage insurance on a renter? They're like, no. And so then we went through and we found the 3 are the Guarantor, Leap Easy, and then Single Key is moving from Canada into the United States. And if you just Google those, you can learn more about them. But like different property managers can use that. But for single family, for multifamily, and the insurance companies are probably going to win in the end, but like specifically for peace of mind, because they are higher risk, it's a no brainer for us and it smooths everything out.
How much does rent guarantee insurance cost? Just rough estimate. We're not getting a quote here.
I would say per $2,000 of rent paid, $83 a month.
Gotcha. So right under 5%.
Yep.
Gotcha. And the reason why I ask is because I'm talking to more and more property managers who offer this rent guarantee insurance or program where they're charging you extra percentages. So I'm just doing some math in my head on, I bet they're making a little profit, a little spread on that.
Oh, sure. And different, there's some that are like $40 a month if your clients meet above like a 620 credit score. And so, but that's in general what we've kind of seen going through the process.
Gotcha. Now, I know we were talking beforehand that you are also teaching a lot of dads how they can go invest in real estate and be more intentional in their life. I think I saw on your website that you offer some sort of mastermind around that or classes around that. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, right now have a wait list that I'm just garnering different interest because it is fairly new. The idea is, hey, what would it look like if your social media feed was like, here's the tips of dealing with a 3-year-old. Like, just like sometimes it's right message, right time, right person. Where like, you just like, hey, turns out your 3-year-old just wants you to label their feelings. Like, turns out that works for my 3-year-old. Awesome. Like, oh, you're really sad that you hit your elbow on the door. And he's like, yeah. And then like gives a hug and like, that's it. My daughter doesn't work at all, right? She'll just like turn to you like a cat and like give you like a stare. I'm like, okay, well, wrong tool, wrong person type thing. And so the idea was crafting a community of dads specifically with young kids that are dealing with all the intricacies of real estate plus career plus marriage plus young kids, and getting them together in a community, and then, you know, offering some one-on-one when someone's like, hey, can I get you for 6 weeks and let's sit down a couple times a week and like hash through like, I got all this stuff. Like I got no sleep, I got no health, and like kind of doing more of a deep dive into like, okay, where they want to go, and then trying to almost pull them up from like the I'm drowning to like, okay, this is possible and maintain. And then there's some people that want to thrive and do even more of like, I feel like things are good, but they could be better. Those are usually the two types of individuals that we got going on.
That's awesome. If you're listening to this podcast right now, you might see my face on reoccurring meetings there, because I know we were talking beforehand. That's how you balance all of that while be present and trying to be a good human to your kids. It's tough. And it's good to know that somebody's also going through the same challenges, specifically with real estate investing and working a W-2 at the same time, and et cetera, et cetera. So building out a key network there is interesting to me.
I think what you said there too was just knowing that you're not going through this alone, and you go in there, like just when you hear someone else be like, oh, did your 3-year-old like pour a bowl of cereal, stare you down, be like, don't you pour that out? And he just like pours it like right in front of your face. I was like, oh, were you in my house this morning? Like that exact same thing just happened. And so part of it's just like, okay, instant relief of like, good. It's like not just me, like there's a group. But then second part is like, okay, what are we going to do about it? Either just accept it, or it's like, okay, so what are tools for acceptance and realizing what you can and can't control? But then like, there's really strategic things with like how kids' brains work, and like, you know, don't give a kid a punishment that's like an hour later than what he did, because the 3-year-old, you know, can barely remember what they did 10 seconds ago. And so it's like, unless you can do an instant punishment, don't even think about doing it later, because that just builds to resentment, because it's like, oh yeah, you know, you didn't behave in the grocery store, so you get no dessert tonight. And the 3-year-old's like, I, you know, like you're playing a game of life, and they're just like moving pieces around. They're like, yeah, I have no idea, like what's good, what's bad. I know I can't do this. And it turns out that I, you know, just ate my supper, but now I can't get dessert. When previously you told me that if I don't eat my supper, you know, I can't get dessert. And so like they get all different confused. And so I got deep into like all like the books for young kids. And so I've read dozens and dozens of books, and sometimes it makes you better. Sometimes you just like, you know, you get worn out, and like some people say, oh, you should like hit your kids because like that'll teach them like responsibility, and some of them are like, no, like your kids are the boss and they can rule it. And then there's like this nice happy medium where you know, nobody's really figured it out. I like the famous quote of you know, they figured stuff out when they stop writing books on it. Like nobody's writing books on math, but turns out people are writing books on leadership, real estate investing, parenting, health. And it's like, so it turns out we don't got any of that stuff figured out, but like science, like, oh, you don't see new books on it. And, you know, so it's like as they're writing more books, it's like, oh, we haven't figured it out yet.
Yep. That's an interesting quote to think about too. Like if they're not writing any books on, they've figured it out.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, I want to switch us now to our last round. We're calling this the 5 toppings. Our first one is, what is your favorite book, or what is a book that you've read recently that's given you a paradigm shift?
So I'm gonna probably play a little bit different, because I think there's 3 different stages in life of like the beginning, the intermediate, and the advanced. And so in the beginning, one that I don't think is recommended enough is MJ DeMarco's The Millionaire Fast Lane, which is, you know, if you're in the thick of it and you're in the engineering, he talks about the sidewalk, the slow lane, and the fast lane of the different ways you can do it. So that would be one of the books that, as I was reading it, you know, in the W-2 world, like that one hit really well on the balancing. And then he describes wealth in a really like healthy way of like, number 1 is health, number 2 is relationships, and then number 3 is like freedom. And so like, that's how he describes wealth, but a really good book for kind of that specific realm. And then I'm going to cheat and go a second one, but Keith Cunningham's The Road Less Stupid for any small business owner. Oh, he'll just like rent space in your brain with some really good questions that if you're just at the gym, like running or pumping some iron, and he's like, yeah, what if all of your customers came by referral only? And you're like, oh man, what if, right? Yeah. And then so he just challenges your brain on some different things. So those would be 2 if I'm cheating on the question.
I like it. Our second one is, I believe that the person you become 10 years from now is directly correlated to the habits that you have and the things you do every day. What are some of the habits that you have?
If you can, go to bed with your kids at 8 o'clock and then wake up super early. Oh man, that like it seems hard and like, but like you replace my 8 to 10 of binge eating and Netflix with 4 to 6 of like, oh, I got to run. I did reading. I did journaling. I did exercise. I got an hour's worth of work done. And you do that for 5 days a week. You are a completely different human being. And I know there's like, oh, I'm a night person or I don't get time with my wife or different things, but like, it was like the 2 most unproductive hours of my day to the 2 most productive hours of my day. And it was pretty easy. I'll read books and I'll literally turn off the lights and I'll fall asleep with my 5 and 3-year-old. And when I'm doing that, like that's like Adam at his best. Don't set an alarm clock, wake up at 4 o'clock. And like life is pretty darn good. Got a couple other ones. I don't know how much time we got or if I should keep jamming.
No, the only thing I would say on that is I'm a big proponent of waking up early. I typically wake up at like 3:45, 4 o'clock every single morning because of what you just said. It's peaceful time, it's quiet time, and I get a lot done during that time. And I know people are out there hearing 3:45. That is crazy. How in the world do you do it? I did it 15 minutes at a time. Like I started at 6 o'clock, then 5:45, then 5:30, and you just kind of walk yourself back months over months and years over years for me to where it happened. So if you hear that and you're like, I could never go to bed at 8, we're a 7:30 bedtime at this household. 8:30 is extremely late. If I go to sleep past 9 o'clock, I'm a very grumpy person the next morning. But just start small and work yourself back is the only thing I would add there.
100%. And then the added dichotomy of young kids of like, how much are they sleeping? And there's different seasons of like, yeah, like you got no sleep. Yeah, maybe it makes sense to sleep into 6 or 7 o'clock. So,
Right.
But like in general, like there's those different seasons, but like, if you can strive for that, yeah, I would second that just a little bit at a time.
Our third one is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
My dad, when I was 13, he said, make money with your mind, not your hands.
Love it.
And
Is he from North Dakota?
He is.
Okay.
And yeah, there might be like, oh, you see that guy working construction, out there in that steel beam when it's like 20 below and hard hats and like all this winter gear. He's like, he might think that's fun in his 20s or 30s because I want to be outside. Your body will break down, you do different things. And he's like, yeah, he goes, you can make money with your mind and you can do it forever. And that really stuck with me. And I realized that there's a lot of people that enjoy like, physical labor or, maybe athletes or different things that physically, need their body. For me, it was that was something like, okay, I'm going to invest in myself. I'm going to invest in my brain. And if I happen to use my body, doing this, maybe, just, on a Zoom call or different things, but man, the mind can work some magic.
Yeah. I worked construction for my dad's company one summer and that was enough for me.
Just got it right out of you.
Yep. Our fourth one is, what is the thing that you're most proud of in your life?
This one will be a little bit controversial. I believe that I should listen to my wife most of the time, but I also believe in the biblical principle that I get the final say of leading the household. If it really came to it, I've only played the trump card 2 times in our marriage in 7, almost 8 years. And one of them was to get into real estate investing. And my best decision was to marry my wife. That was by far easily number one. But if you're looking for a maybe a different answer, so like she maybe start caring about other people, got married. She's like the best thing that ever happened to me, the kids, the family, like easily number one was marrying my wife. But a number 2, if it's a little bit more exciting, was like, have you ever had that battle where you're like 9 times out of 10, I concede, or 99 out of 100, but like, there's one thing where I'm like, this I believe in so much that I'm like literally playing the trump card. And like, we were pulling up carpet on a Sunday night on our very first rental in 2012. And like, we're never doing this again. Right. Like we're like, this is the opposite of time freedom. Like we're losing our Sunday, like the tenants are destroying the place. Our property value is going down. But it was like, okay, think of the long game. How are people doing this? I could try the business. I could try engineering. We could do the slow lane as MJ DeMarco puts in his book. But I was like, there's a better way and I'm willing to commit to this. And if you trust me, like I'm not going to take no. Like this is not necessarily a deal breaker, at the time, like I'm not going to threaten divorce, but there was like something where like we had very heated arguments of like, why are you buying a rental property? And I had to be really strategic with standing the ground on that one. So number 1 was her. And then number 2 was picking maybe the one battle that I think is worth fighting for, and then sacrificing the rest because most of the time she's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Our 5th and final one is, if you could sit down and eat a bowl of ice cream with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
It'd be Martin Luther King Jr. I heard
Okay.
his autobiography and just, judging people, by the content of their character and just all his different leadership, principles and axioms. I just think that there was a lot of great life lessons in here. And again, no one's perfect, but just the ability to courage leadership at a tumultuous time and what kind of charismatic leader and follower and what he's trying to do. And so if that's, Adam, the equivalent of abortion, or if that's, the equivalent of something that you care about, and, how can I take care of my family and be a great leader? I just remember being really inspired by his autobiography.
Yeah, I have a list of like 5 to 10 people I would answer for that question, and he's on there specifically because you mentioned what he did was not easy. He's very charismatic, obviously. Obviously, there's some things that have come out since he's passed that are less than stellar, but I look at my life and I have some things in my life that I regret and are less than stellar as well. But it's mainly because I felt like he was flexible in his strategies. He was always willing to adapt to the time, to be strategic and what is the long-term vision. And I think that's really hard when you're a very dominant personality who's very passionate about an end state. Most people in that position say this is the only way. And I felt like he just kept a very clear vision on what he wanted in the end and was flexible with how he was going to achieve it.
Well said. Well said.
Well, Adam, fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the show. If our listeners wanted to reach out to you, learn more about you, where's the best place we could point them?
Sure. If you're interested on the dad front, it's engineeringrei.com. And if you're interested on the rent-own investment side, it's homeequitypartner.com/investors.
Perfect. We will link those in the show notes. And then Adam, thanks for coming on the show.
This has been awesome. Appreciate it, Matt.
Thank you for listening to Ice Cream with Investors. If you like what we serve you here, it would mean the world to me if you would like, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast app.